Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and on today's episode, we are working on the Teardrop trailer again. Today, I have a really exciting project. We are going to be replacing the entire rear suspension that's an old torsion axle with a brand new set of off-road Timbren Axleless suspension arms. I'm so excited about this. You won't want to miss it. Stay tuned for that. All right, as I mentioned on today's episode, we are going to be removing all of the tired, worn out torsion axle suspension on this 2012 Silver Shadow here, and we're gonna be replacing it with an axleless Timbren off-road setup. Now, we aren't going to be lifting this like crazy or doing anything nuts, but this is going to raise the height of the trailer a little bit, and it's going to convert to a much more comfortable and reliable ride for the trailer down the road as we're hitting forest service roads, going up to the mountains, and camping. And even more exciting, we are going to be installing a set of electronic brakes on this trailer as well. Now, the weight of this trailer is about 12 or 1,300 pounds, so it's technically under that threshold for having trailer brakes. However, having that support is going to make the tow vehicle drive much nicer, and we're going to have a much more comfortable ride being able to stop this trailer and the truck whenever we're driving down the road and hitting those trails. So, in today's episode, we are going to be swapping out the entire rear suspension. We're going to be putting trailer brakes on, new hubs. We're going to keep these same wheels and tires because I think they look pretty cool on this trailer. And we're going to be installing an electronic brake controller in my Toyota Tacoma. So it's going to be a lot of fun. First things first, I'm going to jack this up, put it on jack stands, and I'm going to show you guys what we have underneath the trailer now so you can see why we're looking to replace this. All right, so what was originally installed on this setup is something called a torsion axle. And what that means is that you have this arm here where your wheel sits, and as this has weight on it, it presses up into this wheel well. But this arm stretches all the way across and has some bends in it. And essentially when you have force on this wheel or you hit a bump, something like that, this torsion axle is twisting and turning in order to provide that dampening force that you need to, perform like a suspension. Now what we're going to be replacing this with is a single arm axleless suspension. So just this one arm is going to fit down in here, and this is going to sit kind of farther forward, but the idea is that this allows you to have fully independent suspension, and those two arms aren't going to react to forces that are being pressed on them from the other side. Additionally, we are going to be replacing the hub, all of this, with a brand new electronic brake hub. This trailer actually has provisions for an electronic brake controller or the wiring for it. All we need to do is wire it up to these brakes and of course have a brake controller in the truck. Now, what we need to do to get this out is to, fully unbolt it first. So we'll get the whole arm and everything out of the way. And then once that's removed, we're gonna cut off the old brackets, cut some spots in here for our new arm to go in, and we're gonna replace it and get some new stuff in here. Now to get the old stuff out, we do need to do this on both sides. So we'll take those bolts out, and then we'll take a look at this real quick outside of the trailer so you can see exactly how much we're replacing and how compact and tight the new stuff really is gonna be. Okay, so before we get into tearing the old suspension all the way out of the trailer and everything, I want to take a moment to assemble these stub axles so that they are ready to go in the trailer, get mounted up and be ready. And I want to show you guys a few pretty cool things about these stub axles. So each side has a little sticker on it that tells you which side it's supposed to go on. And you can kind of see, it might be intuitive, maybe not, I don't know. But essentially the way that this works is you mount it up to the frame And the front is the side that has the actual pivot joint for the arm. So if you're looking at the trailer, this is going to be the left side, and this is going to be the back of the trailer. And as a result, what we need to do is add our stub axles here, roughly like so. So this mounts up to the frame and then sticks out on the side here, and then this is where you mount your free hub or your electric trailer brake. So we need to put these 4 bolts in here. In addition to the 4 bolts that you need to put this stub axle on here, it also comes with the castle nuts for your bearings or your hubs, and then the washers and your cotter pins. Now, as far as the rest of the stuff goes, you have your bolts, you have a washer, and then you have your connecting bolts. So 4 of these for each side. Now, one thing that's kind of confusing for some, or maybe you haven't seen this before, this trailer setup, as you can imagine, is fixed directly to the frame. So if your frame is slightly off center or has any sort of imperfections in it, you may need to align these in order to get the alignment perfect on your trailer, so that you're not prematurely wearing your tires and so the trailer tracks properly. The way that that's done with this kit is with shims. Pretty cool setup. This is something that I am not going to cover in this video, but should you need to add any sort of toe, camber, anything like that, the shims that come with it are how you do that. If you are at all confused about that, you can bring the trailer after you get everything set up to an alignment shop, and they likely can help you out with it. It's not a super complex task, but it is something that can be a little confusing. Now for our setup here, we're going to go ahead and put these bolts in, and the way that they have them on the diagram that comes with your kit is washer on your bolt coming up from the bottom and going through the stub axle plate here with your nut on top, just like that. And each of these is going to get torqued down to 75 foot-pounds. If you don't have a torque wrench, it's something that you're going to need to pick up for this job. It is extremely important that all of this gets torqued down to proper specifications, because if it isn't, you could run the risk of having failures on your suspension, or it operating improperly. And we don't want any of that to happen to anyone watching this video. Now, it is very possible that you might find this difficult to torque down while it's on the table. It can be a little awkward, and if you do, it's totally okay. You can wait and do this on the trailer. It will be a little bit lighter when you're lifting it up into place and marking holes and everything, so it might behoove you to wait. It's totally up to you. However, getting this fully assembled here, you guys can kind of see how this looks and how it works. All right, so now that those are both bolted on, I went ahead and tightened them down hand tight, but I am going to torque them fully once they're on the trailer. With them attached to the trailer, it's going to make it a lot easier. Fighting them on the table can be a little bit awkward. So now that we've done that, I do want to show you guys something here on the table, because it is going to make it a little bit easier to see. So this is just for illustration purposes, but these 2 stub axles, or these 2 axleless arms, can be mounted to a box frame trailer, and that's it. You put 3 bolts in, they go through the box frame, works perfect. And in many cases, you don't need any additional reinforcement with that. That's when you have the square box frame on your trailer already. Now, many people will be putting these on trailers that don't necessarily have that box frame. In my case, I do have a box frame, but I am also going to be adding some of this additional support. If you have, say, a trailer that only has like angle steel for the frame, this is something that you absolutely must do. Each of these has a square hole on the side here that is facing the front of the trailer. This is made specifically for some box steel to span between these 2. It's not an axle, it's a stabilizing bar between the 2 of them. And then you have 2 bolt holes right here that are then drilled through that box steel and hold these kind of in relation to each other, stabilized across the trailer. This is something that can add a little bit of peace of mind, but it does add weight. So if you do have box steel and you don't necessarily want to add weight to your trailer, you may opt not to do this. That said, I think it's worth doing, and essentially you have a piece of box steel. This is way smaller than what we need, and it's going to go in between these two, and that's going to be underneath the trailer, so it looks something like that. This is obviously not to scale. So that comes out. We're not going to be using that piece, but I haven't bought my box steel yet because I want to wait and see exactly how wide this ends up being once we have it on the trailer. Anyways, so we have our arms together. We have this prepared and ready to go on the trailer, but the trailer itself is not ready for them to go on. So let's hop back over there and let's start removing and start cutting out the old suspension. All right, so now we have a good opportunity to kind of like look at the difference between these two suspension systems, and it is genuinely kind of staggering how different they are. So you can see the new Timbren Axleless Suspension is your left and right on the side here, and that is the entire suspension. Obviously, we're going to be putting a cross beam in between them, but should your application not require that, those two things would be the only thing on your trailer. This right here is, of course, the full torsion axle, and you can see it's a little rusty and worn out. It did its job just fine, but it is definitely going to be an enormous upgrade. This torsion axle is so heavy, you guys. It easily weighs 200 pounds. With the hubs on it and everything, if I was to add trailer brakes, for example, to this existing torsion axle, it could easily be 250, maybe 280 pounds. I mean, that's a ton of weight that we're removing from the trailer. So now we're going to have the simple suspension in the rear. It's going to ride much nicer, but it's also going to be a lot lighter. So in the future, should we want to tow this with a vehicle that doesn't necessarily have a high towing capacity, we're going to have a lot more options that way. So now that this is out of the way, this is obviously going to go to the dump. We're going to get that recycled. But we also need to take off the metal tabs here and really just clean up the whole mounting surface for our new axleless suspension. All right, so now with that really miserable process of removing those old brackets out of the way, it is time to start mocking up and placing our axleless setup on the frame of the trailer and get it lined up with where it needs to be. Now you'll see that I left a white mark on the body of the trailer to indicate where the wheel stub was outputting on the torsion axle. We are going to match that up with the new axleless setup, get this up here with a jack. There's not a really good place to clamp this, though if you have a way to do that, that would be the recommended way. And you get this in place. I'm using 2 jacks to do it, and then from there we're going to be able to drill our holes and mount it to the frame. Now drilling those holes is pretty straightforward. I like to use a center punch to kind of mark where I am going to start drilling. Then I use a smaller drill bit to start. I drill that hole small all the way through, and then I take the larger drill bit, come back a second time, and drill out that hole to the full 1/2 inch that it needs to be for this setup. Additionally, you'll see here that I had a spray paint. I went ahead and spray painted any exposed metal, and then I'm adding a little bit of Sikaflex along the bottom here. The wood of the side panels was actually exposed, and in these holes it's also a little exposed, so I want to make sure that I made those all really watertight and that there wouldn't be any moisture getting into those spots. This is going to help prevent any issues in the future and make sure this lasts a nice long time. Finally, the last thing that we're going to do here is torque these bolts down to the specified torque in your instruction manual. This is going to vary depending on the size axleless setup you have, so make sure you refer to that with your setup to make sure that this is nice and secure. This is also going to vary a little bit depending on which style of structure you use, whether it's a box steel frame, an L bracket, or you're going to use the cross member. All right, so now that we have these spindles installed, it is time to install the hubs, and that involves greasing the bearings, installing our brand new trailer brakes here. Very excited about this. So this back plate of the drum brake is going to go onto this flange here. The kit comes with 4 nuts and spring washers. You're going to put those on the back to tighten this down onto the flange, and these are side specific. So you'll want to look on the back of this to make sure that you're putting it on the correct side. This, in my case, is the left-hand side. So we're gonna go ahead and cinch down those bolts. They need to be 55 foot-pounds. And then we'll tackle greasing the bearings and installing the outer hub, which actually holds the wheel itself. Very exciting stuff. We're almost done with the hardware portion of this installation. Now, packing bearings is not all that complicated, but if you've never done it, it can be kind of just something that you need to learn how to do properly. The inner race, this race here, is going to sit on the inside of this drum here. So you can see inside of the drum. And before you do that, you need to, 1, make sure it's nice and clean. And then second, grab yourself some wheel bearing grease. There's a couple different kinds. There is ultra high temp for disc brakes, and then drum brake is kind of a more general purpose grease, and it is a little bit lower temperature. We're going to be using that lower temperature grease here. And the way that this works is essentially you're going to take your bearing, you're basically going to scoop a big helping of grease into it here. Go ahead and set it on your glove, and you're going to kind of press this into the bearing face. So you're gonna kind of press it down in and scoop it into the bearing. It's an extremely messy job, and if you do have a machine available to you, I would recommend it. But it's definitely something that you can do by hand as well. Now, the cool thing about these drums is that you are going to be able to service them in the future. So should you need to add more grease in the future, it's a very simple process. There's a grease nipple right on the end here, and when you pump grease into that, it shoves it into the bearing. Eventually, obviously, you have to replace these bearings, but that's way down the road once you have gotten a nice helping of miles on your trailer. And if you're greasing these regularly, you won't have to replace the bearings very often. And while I have all this grease on my hand, I'm going to go ahead and pre-grease this other bearing so that we don't have to later. Now, with that out of the way, the next step is your dust cover. This goes on the inside face here, and that just is going to sit down right in this space. The easiest way to get that in is to use a piece of wood and hammer the wood. You never want to hammer the dust seal itself because you'll deform it and make it not as good. And I would, just while you have this apart here, take some isopropyl alcohol or brake cleaner and go ahead and hit the whole face here, because this is the stopping face. So if there's any grease or debris on here, it is going to keep it from working as well. So go ahead and spray some in there, get it nice and clean so that your trailer stops nice and strong. See, take a look at that. That all just came off. It's a protective coating that they usually put on here, so it's pretty normal for it to be that way. But anyways, the way I like to do this, because you don't want to scratch up the interface of these races, I usually leave this rubber cap on that comes with this. Then we're going to go ahead and lift up our brake hub here and slide that over just like that. And we are going to take our other side of our bearing and go ahead and set that down in place here. Next up, we're going to grab the washer, slide that over, and then we're going to take our big castle nut and go ahead and wind that down on here. And you have to torque this down to a specific torque. I cannot tell you guys how many times I've seen somebody take this whole setup or just any trailer setup and simply spin that down, hand tighten it, or just tighten it to good and tight, and that's it, which is not correct by any stretch of the imagination. This needs to be torqued up to 200 foot-pounds. What that means is that you will need to spin this around. Essentially, the way that this works, I wanted to double check these instructions because everybody has a little bit different process of tightening down a wheel bearing. Timbren and this brake hub, essentially what you are going to do is assemble the items just as I showed you here, torque them down to 200 foot-pounds while rotating this hub right here, back off one full turn, and then retorque it again to 50 foot-pounds while rotating the hub, and then back off a quarter turn. You're going to hold that hub assembly at 3 and 9 o'clock, push and pull in both directions, check for end play, and then if there is any, you're going to want to retorque it. If not, you're in good shape. And at that point, you'll be inserting your cotter pin here, which is going to then get bent over and then covered with this beautiful little dust cover right here. So, very exciting. Let's go ahead and torque this son of a bitch down. Now, next up, we are going to be inserting the cross member. This was pre-cut by a metal shop near me. This essentially is a perfect length between the two arms here. You can see it fully spanning the length of the trailer. Once that's in place, it's a pretty straightforward process after that. You simply mark the holes where you need to drill out and create those attachment points. Get your drill and drill it out just like you did all of the other holes for mounting the frame itself to the body of the trailer. And then you're going to use 1/2-inch bolts to bolt this down and hold it in place. Now, one other thing I do want to mention, you'll notice me here reinserting this bar. You are going to want to paint it. So if you are getting this from a metal shop, you are going to want to paint it or powder coat it. Otherwise, it'll just be raw metal and will rust over time. So anything you can do to prevent that from happening in the future is totally going to be worth it. And once you have that done, that's it. That is all of the mechanical bits associated with this suspension setup. So you can go ahead and reinstall your wheels, reinstall your lug nuts, tighten these down, and you're pretty much ready to take the next step, which is wiring your electronic trailer brakes if you added those, and then of course adding the brake controller to your tow vehicle itself. Next up is wiring the trailer brakes. This is usually a pretty easy process. You'll want to just refer to the wiring diagram. If your trailer has a 7-pin connector already, it will already have a provision for a brake wire. If not, that will need to be added. But essentially that is a 12-volt feed coming from your tow vehicle that will extend back to both of your trailer brakes. That 12-volt feed is what's going to be modulating that magnetic brake in those drum brakes. That will get run back, and then those trailer brakes will then be grounded to your chassis. If you don't have a battery in your trailer, it means you will need to run a ground to this same box and ground it to the wire that goes back to your car, which is going to be the common ground. If you do have a battery on your trailer is likely grounded on the chassis already. Then moving back into the rear brakes on the trailer, each of these wires coming out of the brake controller, they are not polarity sensitive, so you will only just need to run a 12-volt to one of the two wires and then a ground to the other of the two wires. So the way I do this is either with a removable connector or with these butt connectors. These are pretty straightforward. Crimping is extremely secure if you do it properly, and these will be able to get heat shrinked. So as you can see, I've got a ground running straight into the chassis. This is using a self-tapping screw right into the chassis. And then I'm going to butt connect those together. And then I'm also going to be running the 12-volt line to the other lead. Once those two are connected, then it's as simple as heat shrinking those two butt connectors together. And also you'll note that this red wire, the 12-volt feed coming from the 7-pin connector box, I am running a split off of one side, and that's going to go to the other side brake. So this single wire is going to be controlling both of the brakes.
All right, and so with that, we have our new suspension installed, we have our trailer brakes installed, they're wired up, and the only thing I want to briefly show you guys is the trailer brake control system that I have in my tow vehicle, which is a Toyota Tacoma. So let's pop out there real quick. I'm going to show you exactly what I installed in my truck, so if you guys have a similar vehicle or want something similar to what I've got installed there, you can do that on your car. Now, depending on which vehicle you have, you might want to buy a different brake controller, and depending on the vehicle you have, you may have to wire in the wiring back to the back of the truck, but also from the front to actually get that brake signal. If you have to do that, this video is not going to cover that portion for you. This Toyota Tacoma, this generation does come with that trailer brake harness already wired in. And so all you really need is the controller itself, which comes with a little cool little knob that we're gonna install and make a really clean, nice install. And then it comes with its own harness for plug and play setup. It's really straightforward. Now I was gonna do a whole video and show you guys how to install this brake controller, but RedArc actually has a really excellent video on the Toyota Tacoma and how to install this brake controller. I just wanna briefly show you guys what I've got installed here. In order to modulate and control those trailer brakes, you do need a brake controller in your tow vehicle. And the one that I chose was from RedArc here, and it is their Tow Pro Elite. They have two different versions, a Liberty and Elite. The Elite version has a little bit of extra functionality, specifically on and off-road. So this has two modes, a proportional mode, which is fully automatic and will proportionally apply the brakes to your trailer when you press on your brakes. It has a small gyro inside, and then it feels how much force there is and applies more or less brakes depending on that proportion. You can switch the mode to a user-controlled mode, which will then let you spin this dial and choose the amount of braking you have based on that gyro and based on when you're pressing on the brake. This is especially useful when you're on things like poor service roads, off-road. You can manually control this, 0 being no braking at all, and 10 being the most braking force applied to the trailer brakes. This is going to help you kind of control that. And if you're on the trails, maybe you don't want as much braking, or maybe you're going down a really steep hill and you are off-road and you need a little bit of extra braking, you can crank that up here to increase that braking force. So really cool little feature here. And I love this kit because it came with a little insert here and it looks really OEM and fills out the last switch spot next to my steering wheel. So the last thing I want to show you guys before we wrap this video up is a comparison of the two suspensions and how they actually look when they're operating, and to give you guys a rough idea of the poor ride quality I had with the torsion axle and the improvements we saw on the Timbren Axleless system. So let's connect up the trailer. I'm gonna bring this out and I'm gonna show you guys exactly what they look like while they're running down the road. All right, I hope that was a nice comparison for you guys. I hope that showed some of the differences between the two suspensions. I want to say a huge thank you to Timbren because they did partner with me on this episode. They sent this suspension and electronic braking system out to me to install on this trailer to show you guys how easy it is to retrofit this system on your own trailer. And the process truly is quite easy. The hardest part for this setup and retrofitting it was really getting the old stuff off, specifically getting those old brackets off that held the torsion axle on, those L brackets that you saw me starting to angle grind away. That took about 2 hours to get those off and really cleaned up enough to where the new suspension components could get mounted to the square frame. But once those were out of the way, the installation of the Timbren axles was dead simple. You have those 3 bolts going through the frame and then your cross member between the two, and Bob's your uncle. There you go. The only other thing that I mentioned before that you'll need to get done is a trailer alignment. This is something that you can bring somewhere and have somebody else do for you. I likely will be doing that, and I will hand those shims over to them and have them use their laser alignment system to really get it dialed in and, you know, tailor-made and right for the trailer. So I really appreciate you guys joining in. I really enjoyed making this. If you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to post those in the comment section below. But let's get this trailer out. We've got a few more things to do on the inside, and then we'll be back out on the trails, camping, biking, and having a really good time. So until we get this back out on the trail, and I see you guys on the next episode, you know the drill. Enjoy those minis, if you're a mini owner, and motor on. See you guys.